All right, so let's start with some reviews at first, okay? Uh, about monopolistic competition because we talked about them last week, and it's been a few days. So let's see what we do remember. So, what type of characteristics do you guys remember from monopolistic competition? So shout them out one by one. What is monopolistic competition? What does the market look like? Number of farms, or product they're
There,
selling.
there are a lot of small firms.
Good. So many small farms, right? Large number of small farms. And what type of product do they sell?
It is many different products.
Many different. Okay, so they're you could say like they're differentiated products, right?
Heterogeneous.
Sorry?
Heterogeneous product.
Yes, differentiated. Yes. Are they close substitutes, or are they perfect substitutes, or are they identical? What type of products are these?
Close substitute.
Close substitutes, right? So it's not like you wouldn't be able to find a product like this anywhere else, which is the case with monopoly. But it's that they're close substitutes. So each farm, the product that it is selling, in a sense, it is by itself a monopoly, because we talked about in the case of Big Mac, which you can only find in McDonald's. So in one sense, McDonald's has sort of a monopoly over the Big Mac because you cannot find it anywhere else. But you can find very close substitutes at other fast food joints, right? Burger King sort of has this big hopper, other things that are very similar, right? Close substitutes, right? So they're somewhat differentiated, but they are also similar. And what about
There's easy entry.
Easy entry, right? So easy entry and easy exit. And what else? Was there anything else did we talk about? What about the demand curve?
The demand curve is downward sloping,
Good.
but it's not as flat as the monopoly.
Yes, very good. Demand is downward sloping and more elastic, right? So which is, or flat compared to monopoly. So it's not as inelastic. Monopoly curve, demand curve would be more inelastic. Okay, and each farm, right? So each farm in monopolistic competition faces a downward sloping demand curve. But it is also to say that the curve that each farm is facing, the demand curve for each individual farm, is that the same as the market demand curve?
No.
No, why not?
Because each firm can set a different price, and that will change. It's actually no, never mind.
No, you're the first part of your answer is correct. It is not the market demand curve. The individual demand curve that is faced by each individual farm, it is not the market demand curve, because that happens with monopoly because there is only one farm, right? So the farm is the market. But with monopolistic competition, because we have many small farms, so the market demand curve is made up of the aggregate of all of the demand curve of the small farms. Okay, so individual demand curve is downward sloping, not same as market demand, right? So the market demand is gonna be the aggregate demand from combined with all these farms. Okay, so then how do they choose their profit maximizing quantity? How do they choose to do profit maximization?
When price is equals MC equals MR.
Okay, so anytime. So this is, I want you guys to remember, because I see this, most of all you guys, like most people are running into problem with this. So anytime we talk about profit maximization, what we're talking about here is how they choose what quantity to produce that will maximize their profit. So it is always going to be about, how do they choose that q star, how do they find, how much quantity to produce that will maximize their profit. And that is always going to be, so for all the farms that we looked at, right? Perfect competition, monopoly, monopolistic competition, this is the same for everyone. It is always where MR is equal to MC, right? This is where they will choose quantity. So where MR equals MC, this is where they will choose quantity. And then how do they find price?
where it meets the demand curve.
Good. So where the quantity, right? Where the quantity meets the demand curve, this is where they will set their price. Okay? So this is what we had here.
Hello.
Hello. Who is it? Is it Sarah?
Yes.
Hi. Welcome. So we're just going through some reviews of monopolistic competition, so this is what the monopolistic competition, monopolistic competitive farms demand curve looks like. It's downward sloping. It is relatively flatter, right? And then the marginal revenue curve is below the demand curve. And always remember that it's gonna be crossing the horizontal axis halfway. So as long as you're not drawing your marginal revenue like something like, if your demand is like this, don't draw your marginal revenue over here. It should be like somewhere like halfway. Okay. So your marginal revenue is over here, and then your marginal cost curve looks something like this, right? At first it's downward sloping and then it's upward sloping. The intersection of marginal revenue and marginal cost gives us the Q star. And then, where this Q star meets your demand curve, that's where they set their price. And here, because, we're demonstrating this case of short run profits. So monopolistically competitive farms can have profits or losses in the short run, right? So this is the case, where they are making profits. So as you can see, at this Q star, the average total cost is over here, but then the price is above. So of course, this area is where they're making profit. Okay. And then, they can, the same way, they can also make losses in the short run. In this case, at this Q star, the price is, below the average total cost, right? So the average total cost of producing this quantity Q star is all the way up top, but the price, right, is only at here. So this box is then their loss. Then we also looked at adjustment, right? So in the long run, what happens? And the reason we have to look at this, because each farm, so in the monopolistically competitive industry, there are no barriers to entry or exit. So whenever new farms come in, and new farms will come in when they see that there are profits being made in this industry, and they can just come in and they're gonna steal some demand away from existing farms. So what that really does is it causes a shift downward in the existing farm's demand curve and the marginal revenue curve. Okay, so this is, we looked at this last week, short run profit. So whenever these monopolistically competitive farms are making profits, right? So we saw, we took a look at, Bob's Hot Dog Shack as an example, and then these were his competitors, already existing in the market. So here we see that, this was, so this was his original demand curve and his original marginal revenue curve, the D and MR in gray, and then the marginal revenue and then marginal cost, they intersected here. So this was Q star, and then P star would be somewhere over here. So because he was making profit, we saw what happened, right? What happened was, this new farm, Joseph's Hot Dog, came into this industry, right? Because there are very few barriers to entry or exit, right? So he could come in, and whenever he came in, right, because he came in with a differentiated product, maybe his hot dog shack, had different flavors, had more options than, compared to some of the others, right? At least Bob. So what he could do when he came in was the demand curve, right? This is Bob's demand curve. His demand curve shifted downward. Okay. At the same time, so it shifted downward parallelly from D to D2, and then his marginal revenue also shifted parallelly from MR to MR2. So when that happens, there is a new quantity, right? New profit maximizing quantity at Q2, and then this new price P2, which just happens to cross, or not cross, the touch the average total cost curve at this quantity of Q2. So which means what? Whenever
And there is normal profit.
Exactly. So whenever something like this happens, at this price of P2, we see that, the average total cost of producing Q2 is the same, right, as the total revenue. So whenever total revenue is equal to total cost, we have normal economic profit. So this is what will always happen in monopolistically competitive industry. When you have adjustment in the long run, this short run profit will not exist in long run economic profit will always be equal to zero. So in this case, right, so in this way, it is very similar to which market structure that we looked at. Moe? If in the long run, economic profit will always be equal to zero, is this similar to perfect competition or monopoly?
I don't know. I think monopoly.
Okay, not quite. So monopolistic competition and perfect competition, they share the same trait, which is that they don't have barriers to entry in their market. So which is why for both of those markets, the short run profits or losses will not exist in long run. In the long run, economic profit will be equal to zero for both monopolistic competition and perfect competition. For monopoly, it's not the case because there are huge barriers to entry in those markets, so they can actually keep their profits even in the long run. Okay? So this is how far we got to last week. So today we're going to talk about this case of short run losses. Okay, so let's take a look at how that works. So let's draw this. So we have the demand curve and then the marginal revenue. Sorry. And I'm going to draw the marginal cost curve. And then the intersection of marginal revenue and marginal cost, this is my Q star. And this is my P star over here. And then I'm gonna, since we're demonstrating this case of, short run loss, I'm gonna make sure to draw my average total cost curve, higher up. So it's gonna look something like this. Okay? So this is my average total cost. And then who can show me where the area of loss would be on the graph?
It would be like here, and all of this from here to until here is all loss.
So not quite, right? So that is something different that you're looking at. So let me just erase this. Okay, so remember, what you are looking for. So you are looking at, your the quantity that you're interested in is Q star. Okay. So if P times Q, if this is your total revenue, if this area is your total revenue, So now you're going to try to find, what is the average total cost of producing Q star. Okay, so which is over here, right? It intersects the average total cost curve over there, right? The average total cost of producing Q star is that, all of that height. So this is my average total cost of Q star. Okay, so this. So then this is where my loss would be. See that?
Yes.
Okay. So it's not over here because we're not interested in what is happening with our profit maximizing quantity. We're not interested in any other quantity. So I think you were trying to show what would happen at the minimum of ATC. So remember, with monopolistic competition and monopoly, they don't produce at the minimum of average total cost, which was something that we'll talk about later today. So now that we have showed the area of loss, let me just take it out because we're going to show the adjustment that happens when there is loss in the long run. I'm sorry, in the short run. So now what's going to happen, right? In the short run, they're making losses. So some farms, right, some of these monopolistic competitive farms will want to exit the industry in the long run. And when they do that, right, remember we talked about how they had some customers they were servicing, right? And now if they exit the industry, some of those customers are going to go to the existing farms. So the demand for the existing farms is going to happen. What is going to happen to their demand for their product for the farms that stayed?
It's just right.
Yes, because the demand for their product is suddenly increasing, right? Because all of these farms have left, and that shifts their demand to the right, demand for their product. Okay, so I'm gonna shift the demand curve parallelly, right, to the original demand curve. So something like this. So this is D1. And then I'm going to do the same for the marginal revenue curve. Okay. Oops. Okay. So we see that there is a new point of intersection with marginal revenue and marginal cost, which is over here. So this is the new quantity, which is higher than before, because all these farms have exited the industry, and now the demand for the product for the existing farms have increased. So the price, right, would be somewhere over here. So I know it doesn't look like this in my drawing, but imagine that this demand curve, when I shifted it, it was only like tangent to the average total cost curve. Okay, so it should look something like this, where it touches the demand curve. When you shift it, it should only touch the average total cost curve in one point. We call that point of tangency. Okay, so with mine, it looks like the average total cost curve went a little bit down. The demand curve is a little bit higher than the average total cost. It's just it was hard to draw very carefully. But so imagine that this is where the new price is, which is higher than before. So this is P1. P1 is higher than P star. Q1 is higher than Q star, than before, right? So when the demand curve shifted, right, this is what happens for the farms, for the existing farms, that they can now charge a higher price and they can produce a higher quantity. The profit maximizing quantity is higher than before because all these farms have left, and this has increased the demand for their product. Okay, and as you can imagine, once again, when P1 and Q1, right, this box would be your total revenue box, with P1 and Q1, and we see that it is the same, right? P1 is equal to ATC at that quantity of Q1. So once again, right, in the long run, we have normal economic profit or zero economic profit, right? It's the same thing. Everybody on board with this? Who is having trouble, or is there something that you can't really see from the graph, or not understanding very careful, or not well? Moe, do you have any question?
No, I'm good, but like my struggle is when I need like to understand what are the short uh the short names for the, like, for example,
Okay.
MC and ATC. So
Okay,
maybe
so you
I'll be
you
asking those
sometimes
questions.
forget those. Sometimes you forget those, or is it better if I like tell you the full name?
I think it's better the full name. But
Okay, yeah, I will make sure to remember that, and if I don't, you can remind me, okay? So
okay.
here, this is MC is marginal cost, ATC is average total cost, D stands for demand, MR stands for marginal revenue. Does that bring back some memories? Does that help, Moy?
Yes.
Okay, great. Anybody else has any questions here? Because this is kind of important stuff. Like how do the long run adjustment happens for monopolistic competition? Okay, so we have two cases. We looked at short run profit last week. Today we're looking at short run losses, right? In both cases, so with short run profits, we saw the demand curve shifting inward or shifting to the right. With losses, demand curve is shifting out, and marginal revenue at the same time, right? Both of these are shifting out. And all of that, results in, price rising higher, right? Until where price is equal to ATC, and you no longer have any losses. You are now just earning zero economic profit or normal economic profit. Okay?
That point is called tangent.
So yes, in calculus, we don't really talk about this in economics very much. So whenever this kind of thing happens, that you have a curve and then a line touches a curve in one point only, we call that tangency. Okay. All right. So then I'm gonna move forward from this, and then this is we already talked about this, right? So the long run equilibrium. So monopolistically competitive farms will only earn normal profits in the long run, because farms enter when profits are being made, and they're going to steal away some customers, and what that will do to the farms that have remained in the industry is that their profits will decrease and keep decreasing until they're zero, right? And the same thing, farms will exit when there are losses being made. And what happens to the farms that have stayed is that they can now add some customers, right, to their existing customer base. So they can add some customers, and that leads to their prices increasing, and price will increase until it is equal to average total cost. So then you will have, if you multiply this by quantity, we see that total revenue is equal to total cost, and then you have zero economic profit. Okay, so this is what we are showing here on the graph. So demand is gonna be so this is your demand curve, this is your marginal revenue, this is at the intersection of marginal revenue and cost is your Q star. This from Q star, where it meets demand, this is your price, P star. And what we see here is that this is what will happen in the long run. Whether you have profits or losses, in the long run, the price is going to equal the average total cost curve, and you will have zero economic profit. So notice here that it is not the same as perfect competition, because with perfect competition we saw that price, when in the long run equilibrium, it was equal to the minimum of average total cost. Okay, so this will not be the case with monopoly. So this was with perfect competition. Right? So with perfect competition, this was the case that the price, in the long run, price was equal to the minimum of the average total cost. But with monopolistic competition, price will equal average total cost in the long run. So that will give you zero economic profit, but it will just not happen at this point, where this is equal to the minimum of average total cost. Okay, and that leads to some problems, as we will see next.
So in perfect competition, it is in the long run always going to be economic profit.
No, so this also doesn't lead to economic profit, remember. So this is, as long as price is equal to average total cost, you will not have any economic profit. You will have zero economic profit. It just happens at different places, right? Because with perfect competition, remember, your demand curve looks something like this, right? So this is your demand, which is equal to your marginal revenue, and then marginal cost, and then average total cost. So this is P star, this is Q star. So because their demand curve is different, it can only happen, right, that in monopolistically competitive or monopoly farms, it will intersect the not intersect, the demand curve will touch average total cost when it is still declining. Okay, so it will not touch average total cost curve. Like the point of tangency will happen when the average total cost curve is still going down. It doesn't happen when average total cost is at its minimum. They're different. They're just gonna be in different places, right? So in both cases, you have zero economic profit. Okay, in both cases you have normal economic profit or zero economic profit. It's just that they happen in different places of the average total cost curve. Okay, anybody else have any confusion about this? Any question? No? Sarah, Judith, how are you guys doing? I haven't heard anything from you guys. Hello?
I'm good.
Good. Patricia?
I'm good.
Okay, great. So now let's take a look at this idea of efficiency. Remember, we talked about this with perfect competition and also with monopoly. We're always trying to make comparisons with perfect competition because, once again, perfect competition is sort of like the ideal market structure where you have, all of these conditions like efficiency are being met in perfect competition. You have allocative efficiency, you have productive efficiency, but that's why we keep comparing all these other type of market structures with perfect competition to see, if they are meeting these criterias. Okay, so allocative efficiency, remember, refers to this idea of where price is equal to marginal cost. P is equal to marginal cost, and we see that that does happen in perfect competition, right? In perfect competition, remember, marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost. This is profit maximizing quantity, and P is equal to MR, of course. So uh, we also see that price is also equal to marginal cost in perfect competition. So in perfect competition, this will always happen, and therefore perfect competition achieves allocative efficiency. By what we mean by allocative efficiency is that we are producing the amount of good that society wants us to produce. Okay, um, so we produce the amount that society desires. Okay, so you don't produce any more, you don't produce any less. So this happens with perfect competition. So we are showing it here with with a monopolistic competition graph. So we have this demand curve, downward sloping demand curve. We have the marginal revenue curve below the demand curve, and we have a marginal cost curve, right? So if this were perfect competition, the quantity that will be produced is where the demand curve meets the marginal cost curve. Okay, so this is where the sorry, not that like triangle, right? This quantity, this is how much would be produced with perfect competition. Okay, so because we're essentially sort of price means the same thing as your willingness to pay or your marginal benefit. So um, here we're basically with allocative efficiency, the idea is that the marginal benefit to society from consuming one more of something is equal to the marginal cost. So this is why it happens when demand is equal to marginal cost. Okay, in perfect competition. So this quantity QC is how much would be produced if this were perfect competition, and the price would be the same. So this is where P, this is how you can see that P is equal to MC. This is also the price. So this is PC and QC are the price and quantity that would be produced if this were a perfect competition, like perfectly competitive market. But because this is monopolistic competition, we know that the quantity that they're going to choose is going to happen where marginal cost is equal to their marginal revenue. So it happens over here, right? So this quantity Q star is what monopolistic competition will produce. And then the price they will charge is by taking this quantity and finding where that meets demand. So this P star, this is, the monopolistically competitive farm will charge. So as we see, PM is greater than PC. So monopolistic competition right, charge higher price and produce lower quantity, right? So the quantity that society desires and wants them to produce is over here at QC, but they're only producing Q star, but they're charging a higher price. From this price of PC, they're charging a higher price of P star. So this area over here, right, where the 3 points on the triangle comes from this QC, this Q star, and then the price that the monopolistic competition will charge. The monopolistically competitive farm will charge. So those are the 3 points on the triangle. So here you see that this is deadweight loss because this is an area that is going to neither consumers nor producers. If this were if this were a PC market, perfectly competitive market, all of this would be part of consumer surplus, and all of this area below would be part of producer surplus. But because we deviate away from this quantity QC to a lower quantity and we charge a price higher than PC, we have this small triangle deadweight loss, which is going to nobody in society, neither consumers nor producers. So that's why monopolistic competition is not allocatively efficient. Okay, any question here?
Wait, I don't really understand this very well.
Okay, so what part of it are you having trouble with?
So when allocative efficiency occurs is when there is no deadweight loss.
Yes. So let's see. Let's do this over here. Oops. Can't seem to move this. Okay, let's try to draw this over here. So if this were a perfect competition market, okay, imagine that, you know, we're not working with the like straight line, right? So we're looking at it from the perspective of a monopolistic competition. So if this were perfect competition, right, we know that in perfect competition, this demand curve would also be equal to their marginal revenue, right? So if this were perfect competition, the demand curve would be same as the marginal revenue. So the quantity that would be produced is where marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost. So this is where they would produce if this were perfect competition. So this is QC and this is the price they would charge. Okay, and the reason we have a straight line marginal cost curve here is because it's much easier to show what is happening with producer surplus with, you know, a straight line marginal cost or supply. So let me just redraw this with the straight line. Okay. So let's see if okay. So here we said this is where, you know, if this were a perfectly competitive market, their demand would be equal to their marginal revenue, and then at the intersection of marginal revenue and marginal cost is where their profit maximizing quantity would be. So they would produce this quantity of Q star. And remember, any area above price and below the demand curve, that is part of consumer surplus. So with perfect competition, right, all of this, right, is consumer surplus, and all of that area below is part of producer surplus. Everybody with me so far?
Yes.
So let me just do this in another color. So all of this would be producer surplus, and all of that on top would be consumer surplus. So here you have no deadweight loss. But because, you know, with monopolistic competition, we move away from this quantity QC and price PC, right? So with monopolistic competition, we're producing here, right? Here. So this is QM, right? And then the price they're gonna charge is gonna be over here, PM. So what that happens, you see that consumer surplus just now became much smaller than it was with perfect competition, right? Consumer surplus is now that small triangle above, and then producer surplus is all of this trapezoid. But then you have this area, right, that is neither going to consumers nor producers. So this is what we call a deadweight loss. Okay, Jaime?
Yeah, but why does that part, like, how does that affect actual efficiency? Um, because if they're producing at profit maximization, then how does it actually affect?
Efficiency has to do with like whether you are producing as much as society wants you to. Okay, so society wants you to produce this quantity QC and charge this price PC, but you're not doing that. You're charging a higher price and you're restricting output. You're producing lower quantity. So efficiency, remember, so allocative efficiency has to do with whether you are producing the amount that society desires. What society wants you to produce is where D is equal to MC or P is equal to MC. Okay, so that doesn't happen with monopolistic competition. So that's where there is a loss, and it is not allocatively efficient. So allocation means, you know, being distributively efficient. Okay, so it is not like efficient in terms of allocation or distribution because you're not producing as much as society wants you to. Does that help?
Okay. Yes, thank you very much.
Great. So now from allocative efficiency, let's move on to productive efficiency. Okay, so productive efficiency refers to that idea of producing where this quantity where price is equal to the minimum of average total cost. Okay, so as you can see from here, right, this is monopolistic competition, the demand curve, downward sloping demand curve, and marginal revenue. This is the Q star at the intersection of marginal revenue and marginal cost, and then price, where this Q star meets demand, right? So that's P star. So as you see, this is, so they are producing, where price is equal to ATC in the long run, right? So in the long run, they will produce where price is equal to ATC, except that it's not at the place where price is at the minimum of average total cost. Okay, so productive efficiency refers to the method of production. Okay, so are you producing using the least cost method? So monopolistic competition, monopoly, both of those market types, they don't produce at a quantity where price is at the minimum of average total cost. Okay, they're gonna produce, at a slightly, they're gonna produce a slightly lower quantity, right? This Q star, and they're going to charge this price of P star, which is not the minimum of average total cost. So this difference between Q star and QE, so QE is the quantity, right, that, that would, so QE is the quantity where price is equal to the minimum of average total cost. So if they produced a little bit more, right, they could charge, they would have to charge, lower price, right? So remember, so this QE, right, the price would be a little bit lower, but then they could produce at least cost, right? So which is at the minimum of ATC. So they have excess capacity. They're actually able to produce more, right? But they don't intentionally do that, right? So they have excess capacity. They can actually produce more. They have the capacity to produce more, but they don't intentionally do that, because by producing less, right, going from QE to Q star, they can charge a higher price. If they were to produce this quantity of QE, right, they would have to charge a little bit lower price, even though they could produce at least like lower cost, so that at least cost, they wouldn't do that. Okay, so this is why monopolistic competition, and also monopoly, we saw that with monopoly too, they are not productively efficient in the long run. They're neither allocatively efficient nor productively efficient, because they don't produce at the minimum of average total cost. Okay,
And is that bad or good, or does it not really matter?
it's not great. Okay, because we want them to be able to produce at low cost, right, at the using the least costly method, because maybe they could, if they're being able to produce something with least cost, maybe they could use that for other purposes, like by trying to, it's actually, it's not great. Okay, that's what I mean. We, society, right, wants you to be able to produce using the least costly method, but they don't do that. They don't intentionally do that, because by restricting output, they can charge a higher price.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so we actually didn't have time to go over oligopoly today, so we're gonna have to start oligopoly on Thursday. Do you guys have any question here?
Not really.
Okay. All right. So thank you guys, and I will see you all on Thursday, and we'll start our discussion on oligopoly.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
Thank you.
So, so
Yeah.
I had, I just wanted to go over something very
Sure. Yeah.